First up, a few weeks ago, we discussed how to lose your spouse and keep your business. We had some audio issues to deal with that night, and a few of our viewers wanted to know if we could repeat the segment. So returning to our studio to revisit the discussion is Andrew Feldstein and Mary Tersigni. Andrew is the principal at Feldstein Family Law Practice, a law firm specializing in family law, and he is here to help us with the agonizing business question of how to protect our business from an aggressive and undeserving spouse. Welcome, Andrew. Welcome, Mary. Thanks for coming back in. And apologize on the air, Mary. We had some trouble with your audio last time, and I will mention Mary is a lawyer with the firm as well. So both practicing in family law. We're going to find out how do we lose our spouse, keep our business. One of the questions that I had off the top, when we go into business, we talk about a shareholders agreement. Andrew, is there some way, some kind of agreement that I can draw up that will protect me from my spouse? Joanne, this is hypothetical, okay? So it would protect me from my spouse taking more than what I feel I should be giving up. Is there some kind of agreement?
Well, there is something called a marriage contract if you're married, or a cohabitation agreement if you choose to live with someone. Now remember, what you may think is fair that your spouse is going to take from you, the law may have a different viewpoint of that.
Yes.
And the problem that you get into with marriage contracts and cohabitation agreements is that you need to do a lot of work to make sure they'll be enforceable. And if it's too strong or too good of a deal in your favor, there's a reasonable probability that a court may say, that deal is unconscionable and we're going to set it aside.
Now, Mary, how about if we always talk about ILA, independent legal advice, and when you have one of these agreements drawn up, you should always get independent legal advice anyways.
Absolutely.
When you get ILA, does ILA always protect you from somebody saying, no, that's not going to work for me? Can a judge do that anyways?
A judge could do that. It's always in the court's discretion. Obviously, with ILA, it helps to strengthen the standard of your agreement. It helps to, prevent it from being overturned in the future. But we can obviously not say with any certainty whether or not it will be upheld.
You never know who's going to be on the bench.
Exactly.
And I say that with great affection because my brother-in-law is a Superior Court Justice. Unfortunately, he's outside of the broadcasting area, so when I criticize the judicial system, Paul, you won't be able to say anything to me at the next family dinner. Now, how about when I'm getting into business with my spouse, and we're both partners in the business? If the spouse is working in the business or not working in the business, should you have a shareholders agreement anyways, Andrew, just to protect yourself?
Well, I think that's a unique issue that most cases you don't see where spouses have shareholders agreements. And one of the problems you get into with respect to a shareholders agreement that's different than a marriage contract are the obligations. And the obligations in a shareholders agreement aren't such that you have to give full financial disclosure of all your assets and liabilities and income, much like you would have to do in a marriage contract. So I tend to think if your spouse is your partner and you're hoping that a shareholders agreement would achieve your objective, I query whether that shareholders agreement really is a marriage contract under the definition of the Family Law Act as well, and that it may very well be set aside ultimately because the disclosure that was given wasn't sufficient. Because one of the things the Family Law Act says is before you do a marriage contract, a cohabitation agreement, or a separation agreement, you have to give full, frank financial disclosure of all your assets, all your liabilities, all your income. And if that's not done, there's a high probability, especially in the case of a marriage contract, that it will be set aside.
So there's chances are, Mary, you might have both. Then you might have a shareholders agreement and a marriage contract. Would that make sense?
Absolutely.
And we're not just, by the way, we're not just trying to protect males here. I'm just using myself as an example because I just happen to be convenient. But, women have to protect themselves as well because there's a lot more. 4 out of 5 businesses now are started by females. So women need to protect themselves as well.
Absolutely.
What would you say, Mary, what's the most common issue that you're dealing with in family law practice when it comes to business people coming to you? What's their biggest complaint?
Well, I wouldn't say complaint. The biggest question usually is how much is it that I'm going to have to pay my spouse or for child support or spousal support. So one of the things that we always have to figure out is what is your true income for the purposes of calculating support.
So that becomes an issue already when it comes to small businesses, because small businesses have various ways of paying money out. They might be paying money to, they might be paying dividends out to a trust. They might be paying dividends out to a child. A child might be working in the business, and that money's coming into the household. Like, Andrew, how do you separate all that stuff? How do you get that into one nice, neat pile where you say, yeah, that's the amount of money that's really coming into the household?
Well, you just hit it on right bang on in terms of what we sometimes will spend a lot of time fighting about. Some people will come in who are self-employed and say, my tax return says I make $20,000.
Right.
But yet they're living in a $2 million home. They're driving a fancy car.
They're very frugal.
They're very frugal. Or as one friend of mine said, he had a gentleman come into his office and he said, I spoke to a lawyer and they said my tax return says that I make $85,000 a year and that's all I want to pay support on. And my friend said to him, well, what's your income on your company? What's your pre-corporate tax income? The guy said $2 million. Now, under the child support guidelines, the court has the discretion to say, we're going to add back all of the pre-corporate tax income and call it your income for the purposes of support. And there's an analysis that's done whether or not that should be added back. We also have to look at discretionary expenses when the self-employed individual writes off personal expenses through the business.
Which is illegal, so no one would do that.
Nobody would do it, but they get added back. And not only do they get added back, but they get grossed up for tax considerations to be treated as if they were a T4 employee. There's cash components that we deal with. Is the business owner taking cash? And if we're able to prove they're taking cash, if we act for the spouse, adding that back plus a gross up for that. So there's all sorts of different considerations. I mean, a simple one is if the company owns real estate and the real estate is being written off as depreciation. Nothing wrong with doing that, but for guideline income purposes, that depreciation expense gets added back in as well.
And I would imagine, Mary, that it even gets more complicated now when there's partners involved in the business, because if my partners are involved in the business, and let's say we've got 5 partners in the business, and now the court says, okay, we're going to add all of the pre-tax income back to you, I'm not going to be very happy with that, Mary.
You're probably not.
Would they ever do that, or would they say, oh, it's 1/5?
Well, as Andrew was saying, it's part of a whole series of considerations that need to be taken into account, and the fact that if there is partners in the business, they will look at what a percentage of the business that spouse owns.
Right, and I guess it gets even more complicated when we get into companies that are publicly traded.
That's actually,
well. Or is that a little bit easier?
That can be easier. I mean, there can be liquidity issues for publicly traded companies and a shareholder, but also take it back to the question you asked before, Mary, with respect to 1/5 for the 5 partners. You look at the history, and it's the one time you're really happy if your bank is strict with taking money out of the company for your line of credit.
Yeah.
The one time.
That'll be the one time.
We're
going to take a short break. Andrew, Mary, we're going to come right back. We'll be back with How to Lose Your Spouse and Keep Your Business with my guests, Mary Tersigni and Andrew Feldstein. Stay with us.